Mr. Pond Boss, tell me what to do to make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
What a catchy little ditty by Philip Wildman, my longtime friend. He wrote that song and sang it at one of the Pond Boss conferences way back. Golly, shoot, that probably had to be 2012, 13, through there somewhere. Anyway, let's go live. Let's talk a little bit about ponds and fish and stuff. Got an email from Brian and Debbie Corlew today, or Deborah, as she goes on Facebook, about their pond, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And we'll get started off talking just a little bit about a lake that I looked at last week. I didn't get to really talk about it because I went to a special event last week. I got invited by a longtime friend, actually been a friend of mine since the 7th grade, Steve Snow, who actually plays Santa Claus every year. And he comes and entertains our grandkids, at least he has for the last 4 years during Christmas. You know, and I think if my hair was white, he'd try to recruit me to help him do that. Hello, Larry Hardesty. Good to see you. Hey, you guys know the drill here. Hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comment section. Click like and share this to your timeline. You'll be eligible for a drawing. Now, I'm still waiting on those bird dog cups to get in. Jonathan's trading up to a Yeti supplier, so he's waiting on those. Hello, Jason Dodd from Wichita, Kansas. I remembered this time. Oh, sometimes I embarrass myself. So, what I thought I'd do is talk about a lake that I looked at, I don't know, week before last, I think. So, and this is common, but a little bit unusual. But it's a very, very cool story because of the lessons. And I don't usually do what I did this time, but I did it. And I'm glad I did because I saw something that I've thought about before, but I haven't really dug down deep into it, so to speak. Chris Cruz. There's Deborah Corlew. Hey, I got y'all's email. We'll talk about that here in a minute. Hello, Bob. I just started feeding my fish. They're in an established pond, about 12 years old, about a Texas Hunter feeder. Started feeding them MVP Aquamax from your videos. How long till they take the feed? It usually takes anywhere from a week to 2 weeks before they finally figure it out. And some of that depends on how big the lake is and where it is. I mean, if you're in Iowa, it's going to be different. But if you're in Texas, they should be coming to it pretty quick. You know, if you're in the more southern states you are, and really the key is what's the temperature of the water. That's what's going to trigger them to feed. So anyway, I got a phone call. Actually, you know what? The last time I broadcast, I think I was at this ranch where this lake is. So those of you that watched that broadcast, the next day we went and looked at the lake. And I was able to borrow an electrofishing boat. And we dug down into that lake a little bit, and we shocked up. Okay, so here's the deal. The lake's about 15 or 16 acres, and it is 90% covered with mostly southern naiad, or bushy pondweed. Well, when the landowner called me, his complaint was this: I don't think I have any more big bass. I'm worried about my big bass. I've got friends that fish the lake, and he said the weeds are pretty bad, but they're not catching any big bass. Where'd they go? That was his question to me. Well, I always know, based on the question, is that there's some things that we may not know about the lake. So the more I talked to him about it, the more questions I asked. He really didn't have any answers. Hello, Tom Davis. Good to see you, buddy. And so I knew that I needed to get more questions answered. So the first thing I asked him was, how do you know that there's no big bass? He says, well, I had a company come to electrofish it last November, and they didn't shock up any. And they said my bass are way overcrowded, and that I've got too much plant life, and I don't have any bait fish, and they're trying to sell me a whole lot of money's worth of bluegills. So he said, the big problem is I don't have any big bass. So I said, okay, let's make an appointment and go figure it out. Now, I've known this guy, Gary Redwine, for about probably 30 plus years. I helped him with a lake up in Oklahoma a long, long time ago. And he bought this property probably 10 years ago, southeast of Dallas. And he built this lake himself. He and his son and a couple of ranch hands built this lake. They rented the equipment and did all the heavy lifting on it and put in some habitat, not enough in my opinion, but they added habitat. And so when we got over there, the first thing I did was ride around, look at the lake, and it was choked with bushy pondweed and coontail and some cara and some American pondweed, which I like. But he hasn't done anything with the lake for over 3 years. So the lake was built 8 years ago, stocked properly. They were catching some really good fish. Hello, Ian, and there's Drew. There's Dave Weber. Was Bruce Condello in any of the tornadoes around Lincoln? I don't think so, because he was in Nashville, Tennessee. I talked to Bruce on Friday, and he was headed to the airport to Omaha to catch a plane to go to Nashville. So I don't know. Look, I did look at some of the tornado paths. They weren't near him. They were kind of southeast of him, and one of them formed northeast of him, going toward Omaha. So, and Ian, I see your question. I'll get to it here in a minute. But after we launched the electrofishing boat, man, there's not much way we can navigate around that lake efficiently. So I knew we would not be able to get a really good electrofishing survey. But we shocked up 32 bass, and they were all stunted, like anywhere from 70 relative weight to maybe 90 at the very best. And those that were close to 90 had crawfish in their stomachs. But but there was 5 or 6 different size classes. Hello, Al Kahutek. Al and I spent some time together here a few days ago. And so anyway, we decided to call those bass, and I asked him if they wanted them. And he said he didn't. So I said, you know what, I got a friend I think will take those. So I just put some ice on them in the live well of the boat and headed toward Granbury. Called my buddy, couldn't get him on the phone. So I thought, well, heck, I'll just take them home and I'll fillet them myself. So here's the scenario. This lake is covered 90% with bushy pondweed now. We didn't have much winter, so it didn't go dormant, didn't die back. It's still actively growing. And it's really blown up now that the water temperature's in the upper 60s, lower 70s. The bass are definitely stunted. We saw one decent-sized bass. Come to find out, he has had river otters because a couple of the guys that work on the ranch have seen the river otters and even taken pictures of them. He just didn't know it. So you don't know what you don't know. Hello, Fred Bingaman. There's Jim Allen from Michigan. Fred's checking in from St. Louis, Missouri. We got the whole world represented here all of a sudden. So here's the cool thing. I brought those bass home and I filleted them. And being a kind of a fish squeezer nerd kind of fish guy, I want to see things like what they ate. I want to look at their organs. I want to see if there was any discoloration, just fish stuff. Well, out of those 32 bass, 22 of them were females. So they weren't 50-50 like normal. Of those 22 females, 9 of them had a crawfish in their bellies. None of the males had anything in their bellies. Oh, another interesting note. We did not shock up one baby bass, which there should be baby bass 1 to 2 inches long in that lake right now, but we didn't. Hello, Wesley Ellis. Good to see you, buddy. So as I started getting into those fish, I looked at the ovaries of those females. They were mushy. Well, as I dug a little deeper, there were only 3 or 4 of those females that you could look and cut the ovaries open and see that there were actually eggs in there. The rest just looked like yellow mush. So the more I thought about it, the more sense that makes, because they don't have any nutrition. They don't have nearly enough to eat. They can't develop good eggs without good nutrition. So the conclusion that I came to was that nature kind of has a magical way of trying to keep things in check. So when the pond is getting out of balance or out of whack, there's things that happen. In this case, in my opinion, and I'm pretty sure I'm right, was those bass weren't going to be able to reproduce. They didn't have enough energy or enough nutrition or enough protein to properly develop their eggs to maturity to where they could reproduce. And so my take-home point was, and yes, he does have otters. Otters have very likely decimated his big bass because nobody's paid attention to that lake for 3 years, other than some neighbors and buddies that come and fish it and then report back to the landowner that, hey, your fish are overcrowded. They're skinny. They're losing weight, which in fact is happening. So his question was, what do I do about big bass? Nothing. Here's what you do. Hello, Mike Cottrell, Wesley Ellis. Mike Cottrell is Palapena County. Wes is Wesley's from northwest Georgia. Well, here's the problem. Too many plants. That's it. They've completely disrupted the lake's ability to produce fish. It has now segregated all the bluegills. There's a lot of adult bluegills in there. There's enough brood fish in there to support a really healthy bass population. But now the bass are overcrowded, which means that they are losing weight. They're overcrowded for the lake's ability to produce food at the moment. So my recommendation was, let's get rid of that bushy pond weed. So he decided he would do it himself. He bought some Floridone and decided not to put it out because of the weather forecast, which was a brilliant decision because the weather forecast was spot on. He got 5 inches of rain. That Floridone's got to sit in that lake with plants absorbing it for 45 days before the plants start to die. So that's a whole other topic we can tackle later. But taking out the plants was job one. When the plants begin to disappear, told him we need to bring an electrofishing boat over there again and see if we can't shock up and remove as many of those overcrowded bass as possible. Start a feeding program, which he's got one feeder. He needs a couple of more feeders and really start ramping up some bluegill growth after the plant life starts to go away. And then be prepared for the consequences. Now, here's something that's good info for you guys. Hello, Kenny Sanderson. There's Kelly Duffy. Kelly, I'm talking to him about the lake I called you about over near Kaufman, Texas. I called to talk to Kelly about Floridone and how to do it. And Kelly, let me tell you something. Kelly he's a rock star. And so's Kenny. Kenny's a rock star. So we got some rock stars on here tonight. This is pretty cool. There's Wyatt Cunninger checking in from Denver, Colorado with property in Abilene. Kelly lives down near Houston, west of Houston. Kenny's up in Kansas. I promise I'll circle back to that question. But what the recommendation was get rid of the pondweed, apply for triploid grass carp, because we know that lake now has a propensity to grow a gigantic amount of plants. So if he stocks triploid grass carp in at about 3 per acre, then they can be effective to be a lawnmower to kind of keep that stuff at bay. Plus, he added some habitat when he built the lake. Not enough, but some. And then the next thing was to begin to remove some of those bass. And after he removes the bass, and we can age a few. I didn't age any of these fish. I should have, but I didn't because I wanted to get them filleted. And I did it by hand, not an electric knife. I filleted them with a good sharp fillet knife, and it took me an hour. So I didn't want to spend any time because I figured it was irrelevant at this point to find out how old those fish are. I just know they needed to come out. So there you have it. The not having big bass was only a symptom of one of the problems. The symptom was you have river otters. The overcrowded bass was a symptom of 2 other problems. You have otters eating your big fish. Now, the small fish are going to try to take up the room, make up the slack, so to speak. But the biggest problem was aquatic plant growth. And so there you go. And he had no idea that all that was going on. Matter of fact, when he climbed in the boat and he saw that vegetation everywhere, he was stunned. He couldn't believe it. And he's on that lake the whole time. All right, you guys throw some questions at me. I'm going to back up here. Let's see here. Ian, is there such a thing of having 2 feeders, 1 acre big to feed bass on one and bluegill on there? Oh, yeah. For a 1 acre pond, 2 feeders, that's probably overkill. Even the feeder companies recommend 1 feeder for every 3 to 5 acres. Now, what you can do, if you're going to feed big bass with 1, I'm going to presume that you're going to be feeding Aquamax 600. We're a little irritated right now because some of the number crunchers at Purina decided that the Purina Aquamax largemouth wasn't selling enough, so they took it out of the lineup. They're not manufacturing it anymore. They didn't talk to guys like me or anybody that actually uses it, and so we're lobbying for them to put it back. But if you wanted to use 1 feeder to feed bass, one way to do that, Ian, is to set the feeder to go off for like 10 seconds, let the bass get full, and then they'll leave. I'll tell you something I learned. I don't know if I believe this or not, but Dr. Mark Griffin, back when he was developing that Aquamax largemouth fish food, told me that a largemouth bass strikes 7 times in a row, then it quits. So if it can eat something 7 times, it will. And that's why he wanted to grow or create those bigger pellets. They were about as big as the end of your thumb. and then once they get through with that seventh strike, he says they leave and go home. I don't know where he got that other than testing this fish food in a larger aquarium where he could actually watch the fish. But it kind of makes sense. They're only going to strike enough until they get tired of doing that, and if they're full, then they're good to go. If they're not, they need to kind of go back and draw up, another plant. So where I'm going is if you set the feeder to go off to feed the big bass, and they get satiated or strike all they're going to strike, then set it to go off 5 minutes later, odds are you'll get more bluegills. And I've actually done that. It's not just a theory. I've done it, and it works. Let's see here. John Henry. Hello, boss. I have a question. I know several of my large catfish have what looks like scuff marks on them in random places. I thought maybe otters, but actually don't think so. No sign of them. Well, John, tell me where you are. Tell me where you are, because that's going to make a difference. Well, Jim Allen says, will fluoridone kill too much? It will kill everything. So like in your case, you wouldn't want to use it. In his case, he does because he's already got some fish habitat. Now, I did tell him he needs to add some habitat. He knows that because he didn't do enough when he built the lake. But when you start trying to do that balancing act, if you've got a lake with a propensity to grow that much aquatic plants, it's a nuisance. So then you can spend $6,000 or $7,000 on fluoridone, whatever he spent, or do that every 3 years or whatever. So in his case, it won't kill too much because he has way too much. All right, going back to John Henry, let me see. Did you North Central Arkansas? Okay, you know what? And if you're in North Central Arkansas, let's see, here we are, end of April. Most of the time when you see scuff marks on channel catfish, especially the big ones, it's because they fight. But they don't typically start fighting until they go through their spawning ritual. Now, catfish love to spawn in cavities. And otherwise, they're not going to spawn. If they don't have a place to hide, they're not going to spawn, but they'll fight. And they'll fight over territories. They'll fight over just male dominance. And the scuff marks typically come where they're biting each other. And I've seen them roughed up so much that they get killed, that they'll end up dying. And they don't die from the fight. They die from the bacterial infection after the fight or the fungus after the fight. So otters, if it's otters, they're going to have holes in them. And not very many fish escape an otter. Once an otter catches a fish, it's usually done. But I would just about bet you, John, that your fish are fighting. And they're probably fighting to get ready to spawn. Here we are, almost the 1st of May, and the courting rituals start about now, but really get more intense. And it depends on how many catfish you've got. The more you have, the earlier that fighting begins. But they start spawning in Arkansas, North Central Arkansas, probably about the 3rd week of May. So typically in that 10 days prior, that's when they start to fight. You see those scuff marks. Now, another way that you see scuff marks get on fish is depending on the kind of a cavity. I remember one lake that I helped take care of in East Texas, where the guy wanted to add a concrete spillway. Well, the contractor he chose is pretty sharp. He poured the concrete slab, or steel reinforced concrete slab, on the shore of the lake. Then he took a bulldozer and he pushed the slab into the lake. And that's how they built the boat ramp. Well, when he pushed it in, there was a gap between the bottom of the boat ramp where the lake shore dropped off, where it had been eaten out underneath. Well, the catfish in that lake started using that to spawn. And I could take my electrofishing boat over there in late May, early June, and stay off the pedal, just nudge it right up to the edge of that boat ramp, that concrete ramp, hit the switch, and man, those big catfish would roll out of there, and almost every time they had scuff marks and scratches on the tops of their heads where they were getting beat up underneath that concrete slab. Mike Cottrell, are you helping on or in on that new lake boat arc? No, I'm not in on that. The reason I'm not, it's because that's a public lake. And they didn't ask me. They got their own people. That's a cooperative program between I don't know if it's the Sabine River Authority, one of the river authorities, and the Corps of Engineers, and a water control district, because that lake was actually built for drinking water, actually for either Dallas or Fort Worth. But I'm getting some pretty stellar reports. I know some of the guides, and they're sending me pictures, and they just opened that lake just recently ahead of schedule, and there's some pretty nice fish coming. That lake's going to gain some attention. But no, I'm sure they watched a bunch of my videos. Or not. I don't know. They're good. Three-quarter acre pond, depth 9 feet. Yep, you know what, John Henry, if you've got more than 40 or 50 catfish in that pond, now's the time to start to fight. If you've got more than 40 or 50 big catfish. One little note for you guys with catfish, catfish are notorious for outgrowing their venue. They're notorious for filling the niche and overcrowding but not losing weight if you're feeding them. Where I'm going with that is once they reach a certain density, then the water chemistry starts to erode. And as it starts to erode, you got to be paying attention to that and either harvest some fish or be ready to change some water. Wesley Ellis, MVP is $70 a bag, and game fish chow is $42 a bag in my area. Hard to swallow paying $70. Man, I know. $70 a bag. Let me do some math on that real quick, and I'll tell you what that means. And to help, I don't know how you can overcome that sticker shock, but I'm going to give you a way how to do it. So 100 pounds of that is going to be converted 1.3. So you're going to grow 76 pounds of fish out of $140. So let me see that. Is that right? 76, 140, 77 pounds. So 140 divided by 77. It's going to cost you $1.80 a pound to grow a pound of fish. You know, when you go to the store and you buy fish, or you go to the fish hatchery and you buy fish, they cost way more than that. So even though that's still pretty painful, you know what, you just gotta do what you gotta do. If that works, do it. If it don't, hello Kevin Briggs, we got to talk on the phone the other day. Tom Davis from Ohio, I've been attempting to learn more about biochar product. I lost it. In an attempt to reduce nutrient levels. Can you help me with any? I don't know anything about biochar, but I know the concept of what they're trying to do. The concept is to use, and the one that they've started with mostly, and I say they, it's people that are trying to reduce the volume of phosphorus in ponds and lakes. And what they're trying to do is figure out how they can take it and bind it and flocculate it. There's your big word for the day. Most of you guys have already looked that word up. You know what it means. It means clump up and fall to the bottom. That's what it does. And so, I was born like this. Smart aleck. Lost my place here. But anyway, the biochar, I don't know what that is. But I know the concept. And the concept is to try to bind as much phosphorus as you can to minimize the risk of trying to have too much plankton or algae, or mostly Trey Carpenter. Cheers to the water. You and I talked today. There's George Spann checking in from Cedar Creek Lake. The flocculant helps to bind the phosphorus and make it settle to the bottom and not be used by any plants. So that's really what the deal is. So I don't know anything about biochar. I don't know. That sounds like an acronym for charcoal, which I don't know what it is. Michael Larry, good to see you. Kevin Briggs is from the Carolinas. Larry Hardesty advising to check the protein in that food that's cheaper. Well, game fish chow, it's a grain-based fish food. That's why it costs a lot less. And I've told that story about game fish chow. I'll tell it again. Back in 96 or so, I'd helped Mark McDonald start Pond Boss magazine back in 91. The first issue was printed in 92, and I didn't want to be involved in it other than supply content and help in ways that I could. I got helped get the first 100 subscribers. I came up with the money to pay the print bill, and on the first issue of Pond, actually the first 3 issues of Pond Boss. And so after it didn't die, it was starting to grow a little bit. I think McDonald used to say it growing at the rate of a runaway glacier. So anyway, I knew the first thing we needed was a national sponsor. Well, back then there were like 750 subscribers to this magazine, and most of them were in Texas, because that's where Mark was based, and most of my clients were in Texas back then. And so Walter Bassano and I wrote a letter to Purina Mills, asking them to advertise. And sent them a copy of the first 5 or 6 issues of Pond Boss, or the 5 or 6 most recent ones. This was in late 95, early 96. We got a call. Not only did they want to buy the inside front cover of the magazine and maybe the back cover, they wanted to sit down and talk. So they were coming to their plant in Fort Worth anyway, several of them. Brad Shue, Gordon Ballum, John Meadows, Walter, and I, we all met. And I took them to a lake that I had under management back then over near Cleburne, and was pure strain Florida bass. Took them fishing. They didn't catch very many fish. Then we cranked up the electrofishing boat and went right back over where they'd been fishing. And we nailed them. I mean, fish everywhere. And those guys were amazed at what they didn't catch. And they were also amazed at what they saw on the lake. Well, we had a nice cookout that night, spent the night. The next day we had a breakfast meeting and talked there on the ranch where we stayed. And then I thought I'd treat them some really good Texas barbecue, so I took them to a barbecue joint not far from where I live now, over in Glen Rose, Texas, Hammond's Barbecue. So we're sitting there eating ribs on butcher paper on these picnic tables in this barbecue joint. And Dr. Ballum, who retired a couple of years ago, he said, this was in 96, he says, Bob, not only do we want to advertise in Pond Boss, we want to do some things to help the industry. What do you guys need? And I thought about it a minute. I said, the first thing is when we go to a Purina store, the only fish food we can buy is 32% pond chow that's designed for catfish. We're feeding different species of fish, and more specifically, different sizes of different species of fish, especially bluegills, as well as tilapia and catfish, and all the different fish that we were feeding back then. And tilapia wasn't up to bat yet, but catfish, catfish, bluegills, feed train bass to some extent. Even then, they weren't really that popular, but we were doing some of that. So I said, is there any way you can make a feed that's got different sizes of pellets? Oh my gosh, you could see the little light bulb going off in their heads. They started looking at each other and started talking their language, about extrusion and the different molds and the different dyes they had, and how they could do all this stuff to make different pellet sizes, and they decided they could. Well, shoot, about 3 weeks later, at my house, a truck shows up, and I had a pallet of unmarked bags that was game fish chow. And that's where game fish chow came from. It was invented in a barbecue joint over in Glen Rose, Texas, back about 1996, and that to this day is still their #1 seller. But if you're wanting to feed carnivores, it's not the best feed to feed carnivores. If you're feeding catfish, or if you want to feed bluegill just for grins, it's good for that. But if you really want to grow some big fish and do it fast, that's where you got to spend that $70. So there's your little tutorial on fish foods. John Henry said we started taking fish out, probably need to remove about 75. I figure I have around 125, some as large as 20 pounds. Yes, I know it's time to eat lots of fish. All right, let's digest that, so to speak. I hope you laughed at that. Trey laughed at that because I'm a flocculator. There's one, hey, by the way, Trey, since we're going to do that, there's one more C in there in flocculator. It's FLOCCULATOR. Look it up. You know I'm playing. All right, so if you got 125 catfish in a 3/4 acre pond, let's do the math. Let's say they only average 8 pounds. You got 1,000 pounds of fish. That's way too many for a 3/4 acre pond. Way too many, and that's why they're scarred and scuffed up, because they're negotiating in the only way they know how for space. And I think you need to reduce that down. If you want to remove 75, that's a good idea. Now, since you're in north central Arkansas, there may be a fish farm that would buy them from you. I don't know. Because those fish that size and that age could be pretty good spawners. Although, most of the fish farms that spawn catfish are really more interested in smaller fish for brood fish. Maybe you could sell some eggs. I don't talk to a fish farm around there. You're in north central Arkansas. That's Mecca for, I don't even want to use that word anymore, but that's the hub of fish production. George Spann's Cedar Creek Lake. I love Cedar Creek Lake. Tommy Welch, we throw our feed out to the bluegill. We see hundreds of them under the water. They hit the food, but the feed comes back up. Some just don't even hit it as they stare at it. Last year they ate it just fine, and we haven't changed the feeds. Any ideas? Feed too big for the smaller fish we have. I tell you what, do Tommy, soak your feed in water for about 20 minutes before you throw it out to the fish. That way it'll get soft and moist, and they can eat it better. When you first throw that feed out there, they can't peck it very well. They got to wait till it gets wet. So if you'll moisten it, just get a 5-gallon bucket, put a gallon of water, and put your 2 or 3 pounds of feed in it, and moisten it before you throw it out. That'll make a difference. You'll see them. You'll see them. Okay, we'll see. At least it has high protein. Okay, so let me dispel that myth where Wyatt's talking to Wesley Ellis. The good things about game fish chow. Now keep it. Now, I got to reiterate, that is a grain-based fish food. I have toured the Purina plant, and I've toured the Cargill plants that make fish food. I got to know what they do. Cargill, for example, likes to use least cost ingredients, where Purina would rather use better ingredients and charge more for the feed. So, like for example, Cargill feeds, even though they're animal protein based, and I'm not going to point my finger at Cargill because several feed manufacturers have done this in the past. If you'll read a tag, if you guys don't know how to read a tag, let me tell you how to read it. When you read the tag, you're going to look at whatever the percentage of crude protein is. So if the crude protein is 42% on this feed, and it costs $70, and the crude protein on this one is 40%, and it's $36 or $42 a bag, what's the difference? So as you read through the tag, look at the ingredients. If fish meal is listed first, that's the most dominant ingredient. If it's corn or soybean or whatever, that's going to be the largest amount of that ingredient. So all those ingredients are listed in order of volume that's in that feed. Now, if you read a tag and it says feather meal, that's an animal-based protein, but a fish can't digest feather meal. But some feed companies in the past, and I haven't dug into this in 10 years, I spent 5 or 6 years studying it. Some of them, in order to get the cost of the feed down, will use ingredients like feather meal. Well, unless they hydrolyze it or do something, there's not enough of the correct amino acids in that protein for a fish to digest and turn into protein. So read the tag, and that's going to help you understand the price. Oh, here comes Kelly Duffy. Go, Kelly. All right, looks like... Oh, there you go. Oh, you know what? That's a good answer. I messed up on that. Kelly's exactly right. There are some plants that Floridone won't kill. In this lake, it's going to take everything out except the chara, which there is some chara, or any of the algae. So, yes, that's right. Some aquatic plants are more susceptible than others, so the dosage, and they do that in parts per billion, that's what ppb is, might allow some species selectivity in certain circumstances. That is a much better answer. That's why, hey, listen to me. That's why Kelly is a rock star right there. Attaboy, Kelly. Sweet. I'm so glad you're there. You got my back. Michael Eric paid $55 for MVP. I'll tell you something else. Yeah, you know what? Deborah Corlew, I got an email from them today. I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. Hey, let's pause for a minute and do a little commercial. Pond Boss Magazine, $35 a year, folks. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Go to pondboss.com. Subscribe. It's $35. It's cheaper than a Friday night date. I just took Debbie to supper. It was $48. We sat by the lake. It looked great. We ate well. But I could have had a magazine subscription for more than a year for less. So, anyway, I don't know what the plan is that Deborah has in her pond, but I'll tell you about that here in a minute. Dumb tax. Well, at least the catfish and some bluegill will be fed. Yep, well, you know what? You're right. I don't consider that dumb tax. I consider that learning curve. Because, you don't know what you don't know. Part of that commercial is Texas Hunter Products. I love Texas Hunter feeders. They're my favorite. I used to work with Sweeney all the time and got to know Zach Sweeney really well. Zach kind of got himself kind of spread a little too thin. He got a couple of big contracts and then he lost track of his core business. Doesn't mean his products aren't good. The thing I love about Texas Hunter is you order a feeder, it's shipped that day if you get the order in before 2 o'clock. And if you have any issues, which on occasion happens, it's a machine, not very often, they're highly responsive. They go fast. And if you've got an issue with a feeder or the timer's not working or maybe one of the motors breaks, you can call them and they'll talk you through the troubleshooting process. And if something's wrong, they'll help you fix it. Then they'll send you the part, especially if you've only had the feeder for a pretty short time. And so that's what I love. And then Purina Mills, I've already talked about those guys. I love them because not only do they have great products, even though the dadgum sticker price is getting way too damn high, it's not their fault. It's commodities. It's fish meal. It's just ingredients going up. And thanks, Joe. I didn't just make a political statement. I don't do that. I don't talk politics. I don't see any point in it. Do you? No, you don't. Neither do I. I'm not going to sway you, and you're not going to sway me. But you can't deny that the prices have gone up ridiculously in the last few years. But I do love Purina Mills because they sincerely, I've worked with them since '96, so they sincerely want to help make the industry better. They truly do. And of course, there's times I get aggravated with them because sometimes the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. The production side is different than the marketing side. And since they're owned by Land O'Lakes, there's people that make butter for a living. They're trying to make decisions about feeding things. And when you look at fish, it's kind of a stepchild because that's not their core business. So it takes advocates like me and other guys that want to get in there and help them figure out what to do, and they're willing to do that. All right, let's see. Mike Crosby. Hello, I got 2 ponds in southeast Georgia using Greg Grimes for helping manage them for trophy fish. Having 265 pounds delivered this weekend. How beneficial is this for raising bass? 265 pounds of what? I need to know 265 pounds of what? I know this. Greg Grimes and Matthew and all those guys over there, those guys are consummate professionals. They know what they're doing. In Texas, we say it's not their first rodeo. And they take great pride in what they do. So listen to those guys. Listen to them. Now, tell me 265 pounds of what, and I'll tell you how beneficial it is. Hey, there's Joel. Oh, crawfish. Okay, there it is. I see it now. Crawfish. 260. You know what? I'll tell you this. Crawfish is a pretty inexpensive munch. I tell you why I like crawfish. I like crawfish because they fill a gap in the food chain. So when you're coming out of the winter, your food chain's pretty well been decimated. It's going to take a few weeks or months for that food chain to begin to rebuild. But in the meantime, those fish, if they lose 1 day, 1 week of eating, it's hard to make that up. Now a bass can make up 5 or 6 days, but it can't make up 5 or 6 weeks. So adding some crawfish in there is a pretty good idea because it gives them something immediate. It's highly digestible. It's one of their favorite things anyway. And I'll tell you something, here's a side benefit to that. It alters their behavior. Think about that part. You know, 265 pounds of crawfish at whatever they're selling them for, $5 a pound or something, I don't know. You know, $1,000, you're going to spend more than that on a fishing trip if it's your boat. You know, by the time you pay the insurance payment and the whatever you paid for the boat, capitalize that, go buy beer, go buy food, rent a cabin, whatever, you know, you're going to spend $1,000. If you spend $1,000 on crawfish, you're going to grow some, you're going to help fill the gap of the food chain feeding them crawfish. So I'm a fan of crawfish. Pretty good bang for the buck. Sometimes you can get them for $3 a pound. I don't know what it is over there. Maybe $5 a pound. I don't know. 7 sacks for $200. Holy cow, that's cheap. Because each sack's about 30 pounds, so you're paying 25 to 30 pounds. So, well, hell, Joel, where do you live, though? That makes a difference. If you live close to the source, you're going to pay $1 a pound. But if you live in Georgia, you're paying freight. There's the big difference. Dan Friend, to maximize bluegill growth, how many times a day can you feed using Aquamax 500? And you said you're in, where did I see, Wisconsin? I think I saw, yeah, in Wisconsin. Let me answer that like this. When the water temperature is between 65 and 80, say 82, you can feed them as much as 3 times a day. But what you don't want to do is overfeed them, especially in Wisconsin. Yeah, Clinton, Louisiana. There's your answer. I knew you was in Louisiana. But you know, the thing is, in Louisiana, I mean, you're right there where the people are trapping them out of the bayou or off the crawfish farms. So you can get them pretty dirt cheap. And plus, let me tell you what Joel's doing with those 7 sacks of crawfish at $200. He just shot a hole in what Greg Grimes is doing up there for Mike Crosby. You're buying in Pond Run. So when Joel's buying in Pond Run, the different sizes crawfish bring different prices. So there's bait size, then there's food size, then there's those that are in the middle. And nobody really wants to buy those, but the crawfish farmers want to sell them. So what they do is they discount the price a little bit. Reno, I see your question. I'll be right back to you on that. I want to go back to Dan on feeding the bluegills. You could probably feed them 3 times, but now here's why. When the water temperature is 65 to low 80s, they're going to digest that feed within about 6 or 8 hours. They're going to digest it, and they're going to be ready to eat again. So I would feed them twice. Most people feed them twice. You can get away with feeding them 3 times because here's the thing in Wisconsin, you got a much shorter bluegill growing season than people in the South do. So you want to make those bluegill grow as big as they can, as fast as they can, feed them more. Now be sure they eat it. Now if you're feeding that MVP, or no, you said 500. If you're feeding 500, that's perfect. That's the perfect fish food. That's small pellets. They're going to eat it, and that stuff sinks slowly. So the number one objective is to be sure all of it gets consumed. And if you want to feed them 3 times a day, you can, but you're only going to do it for a short window. You're only going to have 90 days where that water temperature is in that zone, maybe 100 days. And when that happens, then back the feed off. When the temperature gets lower or higher, back the feed off a little bit. And you'll be able to grow some really, really nice bluegills by doing that. Reno, I got to talk to Reno the other day. Will crawfish cause a pond to leak? I have seen crawfish cause a pond to leak where there's a clay layer less than 2 feet thick. So in areas that are notoriously sandy and ponds are built in sandy soils, then the contractor really needs to add a clay liner to the bottom of the pond and compact it. And I think it's for every, I'm guessing here, I think it's for every 6 feet of depth, you need 1 foot of compacted clay. So if you got a pond that is 12 feet deep, you need 2 feet of compacted clay. Now here's the way it works. Crawfish like to burrow into the clay. Now, when they burrow, they're getting ready to reproduce, so they're not going to do that underwater, typically. They're going to burrow down from the ground outside the pond, build a little chimney, then there'll be some water seeping into their hole, and that's where they reproduce. So the bottom line is crawfish can cause a pond to leak, but only in those that are clay lined. Now, if it's a natural clay bottom and the clay liner's thicker than 2 feet, not so much risk. Even if they go into the dam. If the dam is built right, they're not going to cause it to leak. You're going to have something else. You'll have a willow tree cause it to leak before you have crawfish. All right, folks, tell me some more questions out here. I'm running out of topics. I don't know. Let me think about it. We'll get a topic. Oh, let's go back to the coraloos. I told them I'd talk about that. That's how we'll finish the rest of the time. Jim Allen here. There are 3 types of crayfish: crawfish, mud bugs, crawdads. We have the kind that's on dry ground and burrows into the clay, not the aquatic only type. Yeah, there's way more species than that. There may be 3 types. Some of them reproduce by burrowing. Some reproduce in aquatic plants. Some burrow into mottes of grasses and live in that. And all of them feed on vegetation and detritus. They'll eat meat if they can catch it, but a crawfish, not only does he have to work hard not to get eaten, he's got to work pretty hard to eat. So they're a lot less finicky than a fish is on what they can eat. So let's go to the coraloos for a minute. So after extensive conversation with Jason Dodd last year, who did exactly what the coraloos needed to do, Jason eradicated all the fish because the majority of the fish in his pond in Wichita, Kansas, were either gizzard, shad, or carp. Well, the coraloos had a similar circumstance, so they decided that they were going to renovate their pond and kill all the fish. Well, what they did, I got an email from them today where their visibility is 9 feet. So they dropped a Setchi disc down and could see it at 9 feet. That's clear water. So when you have water so clear, especially in northwest Illinois, this time of year it's going to jump up with aquatic plants. And when that happens, you got to jump on top of the aquatic plants. Now, they said that they put some black dye in recently. It's too late for that. Once those plants begin to manifest at the surface, they're going to be able to derive the energy they need from the sun and the food they need from the pond bottom. Because as you think about it, that pond was muddy for years and years and years, and it was collecting nutrients in the bottom forever. And so now those nutrients are not going to go to waste. The nature is going to use those nutrients and grow something. So now is the time that you need to be looking at, I don't know what your options are in northwest Illinois, but your options are going to include triploid grass carp if you can get permitted for that. But you need to be looking at a herbicide and knock them down now, because you're going to need to reduce the clarity of your water in order to be able to keep those plants at bay. And I think in your case, triploid grass carp are a better option if you can get those there. All right, so Wesley Ellis in northwest Georgia, we're looking at the shore, see bass at 2 inches, some at 6 inches. Were the 6-inch bass born in the fall? Probably not. The 6-inch bass were probably hatched back in July or August, and they were late to the feed trough. Didn't grow very fast. The other choice is that when bass are first hatched in the spring, they don't all grow at the same rates. Now, it kind of gets skewed because of what we see, because so many of them get eaten. Some of those bass will grow so fast they eat their brothers and sisters. And the bottom line is they're going to be foraging on each other heavily in whatever they can eat. I have seen some 6-inch bass that are 1 year old just because they suck. There's one answer. The other one is I don't think those 6-inch bass would have been hatched last fall. If they were, it would have been in September as kind of a remnant spawn, because that female did not lay all her eggs in the first 2 spawns of the year. And it was time to begin to generate new eggs. Let's see what Jim Allen says. Our dam safety engineer poked a stick into a crawfish mound on a dam toe, and it pushed up water. It was a good sign the dam was saturated. Good observation, but bad news. Well, the bad news is every dam is like that. The crawfish would not have built it would not have dug its hole there if it couldn't access water, because it's got to have that. You know, where Jim is going is the dam safety engineer was making a point that they've got seepage. And I have to tell you what Mike Ottos told me. He says every dam leaks. Some leak more than others. Some soils leak more than others. Even if one lift of clay wasn't compacted properly, it's going to allow seepage. So every single big dam I've ever seen has French drains, where they actually they'll dig a trench, they'll build a French drain and guide the water to a common release point, which is typically the creek that they dammed up. And some of them have vents. I mean, if you next time you go across a big dam on a public reservoir, look on the backside slope, and you're going to see vents down there. And those vents allows air to be used to help the movement of seepage out of there. Reno says, what would be the best aggregate for spawning beds? I'll tell you exactly what it is. Washed pebbles, 3/8 inch, creek rock, blasting sand, 3-inch river rock. I mean, not 3 inch, 3/8 inch river rock. That's what you want. R.E. Thompson, there he is from Mississippi. Greetings, finally. Just got in from installing a Texas Hunter on my newest pond. You know, R.E., that dude, I don't know, he's like 135 years old, 84 or something in real life. But the guy's on the go. He just remodeled a boat. You know, he teaches at his church. He works with substance abuse people. He manages ponds. He mows yards. He'll make it to 140. If he dies, it'll surprise all of us. Welcome aboard, R.E. Got to pick on you a little bit. So, hey, it's 7:22. You got any more questions? Let's go back and see if I can think of anything else for the quarterly. Hey, there's Dennis Backcheese. I wonder what the bass and crawfish are like in Germany. Well, if our grandson, your son, Nolan, would pick some up, I couldn't get that kid to hold a fish if my life depended on it. But we're proud of Nolan Backcheese, 19-year-old airman with the Air Force. He just got dispatched to Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany. He's only been there a day and a half probably, and we're praying for him every day. And we're rooting for him, and we know he's going to do it. There we go. So let's see here. There's Ron Krisman just tuning in. So am I. I'm about to tune out. 31 smallmouth bass in my breeder pond as of today and growing. Things are really early this year. You know what, dude? I'm telling you, my experience so far indicates everything is 2 to 3 weeks early this year. And it's got to do with not having much of a winter. You know, and so that doesn't surprise me at all. Dennis, I love that little emoji. I don't know where you got it, but I like it. So I want to go back to the Corlews. Corlews, number one thing you need to do is identify the plant. Go to Aquaplant. Aquaplant.tamu.edu, I think. Look up Aqua. Just Google Aquaplant. Then identify the plant. Now, I know in your email you said some of it's curly leaf pondweed. Curly leaf pondweed has got a really short growing season. That stuff grows typically just for about 2 or 3 months and then tops out and then it's done. It starts to fade out as other plants begin to compete with it. But I think part of what you're going to want to do is make sure you know what plant it is. Odds are high you're going to need to take some of it out with a herbicide, which that's one of the costs of having a pond. You got to, you know, I got a swimming pool that I'm out there every frickin' day pulling leaves out of the skimmers and making sure the chlorine content's right, and it's a salt pool. You know, so there's just maintenance things you got to do. Michael Ehrig from Iowa. I know walleye are not a thing for southern waters, but I hear many say walleye won't get bigger than 18 inches in most cases up here in Iowa. I'll tell you what my thoughts are, not true. I think 18 inches may be more of an average because I've seen walleye south of you in Missouri that are 24 inches long. You know, and what's really crazy is I've stocked some walleye there and monitored them over the years, and I've seen same age walleye, same age class from the same source, where the small ones are 8 inches and the big ones are 24 inches, but they probably do average 18 inches. And when they run out of food, man, they start to lose weight. So you kind of got to make sure, that's not very decisive. You have to make sure that they've got the food they need, because then they're competing with other fish. So when you start thinking about walleye as a singular source as a predator, you got to be sure that they have all the food they need at the different sizes. And contrary to what people believe, I have electrofished walleye in 24 inches of water in June in the daytime. And they're coming up in that shallow water feeding, and that's because they're hungry. So even though they like cool water, that doesn't mean they'll avoid warmer water. That water was in the 80s, low 80s in June. Still can't find a source for walleye in Kentucky. I would call Jones, because Jones is in Cincinnati, Ohio, right across the river. And I know they do a lot of business in Kentucky, and I bet you if anybody can find walleye, they can find them. Okay, there's my thoughts from Michael. And there's Jim Allen. Let me make sure I got it all. 31 smallmouth beds in my breeder pond. That's really good, Ron. Hey, Ron, are you a producer of smallmouth bass? If you are, either message me here on Facebook or send me an email at boblusk@outlook.com and tell me what you do. Because if you've got 31 smallmouth bass in your breeder pond, that tells me that you're a fish producer. So send me a note. Tell me what you do, because I don't know. Either that or I'm blind. All right, I'm going to back up through the questions, make sure I got everything covered before I sign off tonight. Yep, I think I got it. All right, there it is. So, hey, I really appreciate everybody checking in. I don't know how many folks we had tonight. It keeps getting covered up. We got 16 viewers now, which is lower than normal. But that's okay. We'll keep doing it as long as people are watching, because that's my calling, Let me scroll back down here. Yes, I am, Bob. Oh, Kenny Sanderson's been out twice. Oh, okay. Yeah, send me a message. All right, here's Kelly Duffy. Let's see what he's got. I see some who elect to fertilize, to treat once, and then stop, and wonder why they lose their bloom. Maybe explain the need to feed the bloom. Oh, there you go. That's a good idea, Kelly. Okay, so like in the Corlews example, I would treat that vegetation with some herbicide, but then follow up with fertilizer. Even though you're in northwest Illinois, I know where you are, you still need to get a plankton bloom growing in that lake. If you'll do that to kind of block the sunlight off the bottom of the pond long enough, now you don't have to have a bloom forever, but like in Illinois, you want to keep that bloom going until probably the end of June, then let it dissipate. So you got to learn, where Kelly's going here is you got to learn how to fertilize, and I like to start with 3 or 4 pounds of phosphorus per surface acre, which is almost blasphemy if I'm talking to Bruce Kanya in Montana, which it is there because they've already got too much phosphorus. But if you had too much phosphorus, you'd have a plankton bloom going right now. So if you can initiate a plankton bloom and then watch the color, it'll start off kind of as a lime green. Then it's going to shift to more of an olive green, then an olive brown. And when it hits that olive brown, it's time to hit it with a half dose of fertilizer to perpetuate that bloom for another 2 to 3 weeks. If you'll do that, you'll buy time to keep those rooted plants at bay, plus you'll minimize the risk of them growing up from 9 feet deep. And that's one of the biggest problems. Looky there's Peyton. Let's see what Peyton's got. Hey, Bob, is clear water and sunlight a large contributor to hyperpigmentation, melanosis spots on bass, or is it an abrasion? The melanosis spots on bass is a virus, believe it or not. And actually, our good buddy Stephen Barden with Major League Fishing is doing some pretty cool research on that. And I expect him to tell us what that is before long. But clear water and sunlight are not a large contributor to hyperpigmentation, melanosis spots on bass. It's not an abrasion either. It's more of a virus, but it's not a virus that is a problem. And that virus can be passed from fish to fish. So, hey, guys, good questions right there at the end. I felt like we were in a NASCAR race coming down to the wire, and you guys are all wanting to win. So, hey, don't forget, Palm Balls Magazine, $35 a year. Cheaper than a Friday night date, or like on my case, a Tuesday night date. But it lasts a year. So, hey, appreciate you guys chiming in. Also, don't forget, the Institute of Higher Pondology. I got room for 2 or 3 more people coming up, May 30, 31, June 1. Send me an email if you're interested. If you forgot my email address, send it to info@pondboss.com. That way Leanne and I will both see it. So, until next Tuesday, let's see, next Tuesday, you know what? I'll be in Mississippi next Tuesday working on some lakes. So, I don't know where I'll be, but I'll be tuning in with you guys and be hanging out with Buddy Floyd, who's a lake builder over there. So until then, adios for now.